For the vast majority of people who celebrate Christmas, it's a joyous time. Time of year filled with sparkling lights, family, warm fires, and especially homely meals. For me, it means trying not to embarrass my wife in front of her parents, dodging the spray of half-chewed turkey flying from Great Aunt Barbara's mouth as she expresses her opinions, and smiling as I sit through several interrogations about my latest job promotion. It's sort of tradition that at least once a year, someone will have gravy poured into their hair for one reason or another. Having said that, it's not all bad. We always come away with a great story to tell our friends, and I get to see my nieces and nephews. I've always wanted kids, but something about pushing a small watermelon out of her woo-ha is unappealing to my wife. So we won't be having any kids of our own, which means I sort of father over her sister's children instead. Her sister has 5 kids. The youngest is only 18 months old and has a lot to say for a little man who can't talk. Then there's the twins, Haley and Jackie. They're 5 and adorable. The second oldest is Stephanie, and she's 7. She loves it when I magically pull coins out of my nose. And then there's the eldest, Jacob. Jacob is quietly my favourite. He really feels like he's my own son. I think it's because his own father isn't in the picture. Of the 5, he's the odd one out, I suppose you could say. The other 4 are from the same father, my wife's sister's husband. But Jacob's father was a deadbeat that ran off when he was barely a week old. When the family gathers for Christmas, it's usually a week-long event. We all drive, fly or coach in from wherever we are in the country and stay at my wife's parents' ranch. The location is quiet and secluded. The nearest town is nearly a half-hour's drive away. Coming up to it, you see long expanses of snow-covered fields, lined with tall pine forests, and the outline of the ranch looming in the distance. It's really a huge house. We all get our own separate, fully furnished guest rooms. Out the back is a large pond that's, more often than not, on its way to freezing over, and the horse stables. A part of the tradition is that all the men of the family go out there on horseback to pick up a tree and to shoot some poor creature for the Christmas dinner. Always a fun event for someone like me who, A, can't ride a horse, and B, gets nauseous when they start skinning the things they've shot. Thankfully, after the first year's chaos, they now leave the tree gathering to me rather than the animal dismembering. This year, my wife and I were the second to arrive. Her sister's family was already there and greeted us warmly, which meant that we were waiting on her great aunt to show up. Not that anyone would really mind if she didn't. Unfortunately, however, they arrived not too long after us. With everyone accounted for, the festivities began. My father and brother-in-law hunted a deer, while I cut down a nice fluffy Christmas tree. We settled in that night, after a rousing game of family 8-ball, and a little too much eggnog. However, at around 2 a.m, I felt someone pushing at my shoulder, and I grumbled a sleepy, "Stop it," to my wife. "It's me, Uncle Tom." My nephew's voice responded quietly. For a moment, I almost wanted to ignore him, but the stressed tone in his voice was too urgent. "What's up, buddy?" I asked, groggily, sitting up to push the sleep out of my eyes. "There's someone outside my window," he whispered. This woke me right up. Within moments, I was quietly tiptoeing down the hall, following Jacob's lead to peer out his window. Now the moon was near full, and the white snow on the ground gladly reflected back its light to make it quite bright outside, despite it being so early. "Over there, by that tree," Jacob said, pointing out into the yard by the edge of the forest. Squinting, I tried to see what he was seeing. "I don't see anything, mate," I told him gently, so as not to dissuade him, but he insisted. "No, it's right there," he insisted urgently. I of course looked again. For a long moment, I searched and found nothing. I was just about to turn back to him, to reassure him that there was nothing there, when suddenly, an unnatural shape caught my eye. Further into the woods than I had been expecting stood the silhouette of a large, tall man wearing a big red coat. Relief washed over me. I knew what this was. That was the life-sized blow-up Santa my father-in-law usually put on the roof. Why it was on the ground, I didn't know. Perhaps it blew down. Naturally, I reassured Jacob that it was just the Santa decoration from the roof, and I put him back to bed, closing the curtains so that he couldn't see it floating there menacingly. Then, I pulled on a jacket and slippers to march outside. It was my intention to retrieve the damn thing so that it wouldn't blow away any further, or scare the crap out of any more of my nieces or nephews. But when I got out there, I couldn't find it. Apparently the view from the window was different or something, because I spent a good 10 minutes marching around out there, unable to find it. When I got to the spot that I thought I'd seen it, I found the snow there to be slightly disturbed. In the moonlight, I could see little sparkles of something on the snow. Red glitter? That's weird, I thought. Then I noticed there was a present box sitting half nestled behind the nearest tree. Confused, I picked it up. The label on it was addressed to Jacob in letters big enough for me to make out in the dim light, so I decided to take it back inside with me. I was maybe halfway back to the house when I realised something that sent a chill down my spine. Up on the roof of the house was Santa in all his plastic glory, with a jolly smile and friendly wave, lit up from within by a cheerful light. I felt my head spin as I pieced the thoughts together. If blow-up Santa was up there, still plugged in, then what the heck had I seen in the woods? Was whatever I saw still out there with me? I legged it back inside, still clutching the Christmas present I'd found. Immediately upon returning to safety, I woke up my wife quietly and she in turn woke up her father and sister. In almost no time, we were a quiet assembly of people gathered around the table, staring at this box. "Should we open it?" my wife asked, nervously. "Ew, no. What if there's something dead in it, or poisoned?" my sister-in-law asked. "I'll do it," my father-in-law huffed gruffly, moving in to grab it. But I spoke up quickly. "I think I should do it. I've already touched it. If there's something bad or poisonous, better that only one of us be exposed to it." Heavy silence followed before my father-in-law nodded in agreement. Gingerly, I looked over the box. It was light and nothing rattled, so I began unwrapping it delicately. Inside was a set of kids' pajamas, red and green, striped, with an elf hat to complete the look. Tucked under the clothes, however, was a card. I already didn't like where this was going, but took up the note anyway, to read aloud for everyone. "Dear Jacob, I could use another little helper this year. Won't you come be my best elf? Love, Santa." That was unfortunately just the start of our ordeal. Initially, our theories on who had left it ranged from some deranged person who had somehow made their way all the way out to the ranch, to Jacob's father, who didn't know where the ranch was. Of course, none of these scenarios were very likely, and only fractionally plausible. We of course didn't tell Jacob that there was actually someone outside his window. Didn't want to freak the poor kid out. But we did make sure to keep a closer eye on all the kids. In the following days leading up to Christmas, we kept vigil, and minor incidents began to occur. In the mornings we'd find footprints in the snow, covered in red glitter, that seemed to steadily be getting closer to the house. And even during the day, the household felt watched. When having our family game day, we would find tokens for an extra player when there wasn't one. And whilst outside building snowmen, we found pieces of torn Santa clothing that did not belong to our household. My father-in-law, not too subtly, kept his hunting guns closer at hand after that. The worst things happened during the nights, of course. Jacob would wake screaming that someone was coming to take him, or that something was outside his window, or tapping on it. But whenever we would get there to check, there was no one there. Only a light sprinkling of glitter. Come the morning of Christmas Eve, my brother-in-law stepped out the back for a cigarette and found a second gift box. Inside that one was what we guessed to be a squirrel, though it was too mangled and frozen to really say with any certainty. The evening settled in that night with a heaviness in the air. We could all feel it. The joy of Christmas was being leached from the air. by more than my in-laws. When I went in to say goodnight to Jacob, I found him crying in his bed. When I asked him what was wrong, he insisted that Santa was going to turn him into an elf, and that he'd never see any of us again. Now, we of course never showed him that note, and when I asked him why he thought that, his answer was vague. I decided then and there that we'd keep watch over him for the night. That seemed to calm him somewhat, and he agreed to at least try to sleep. We worked it out amongst ourselves that I would take the first watch, followed by my brother-in-law, and then my father-in-law would take the final shift. I settled in for my watch with a book and a reading light at around 10 p.m. Christmas Eve. Things were pretty uneventful until just after midnight. And then I heard it. Disturbing me from my reading was the faintest sound coming from the window. Someone, I realised, was scratching something sharp against the glass to create a high-pitched scrape that seemed to reverberate down my spine. I stood slowly and took hold of the rifle that had been standing up beside me. I'm really still not that great with firearms. I approached the window. Using the barrel of the gun, I pushed back the curtains. What I saw next still has me shaken. Standing right there, with his face near pressed up against the window, was the most deranged individual I have ever seen. He was pressing the tip of a knife to the window, wearing a grungy Santa costume, and had long, scraggly grey hair hanging in greasy wads from under the Santa hat that in no way hid his male pattern baldness. The part that was the most disturbing and screamed lunatic the most, however, was his lips. They were bleeding and damaged. It was painfully clear that he'd been chewing off his own lips, leaving his toothless gums exposed in some places. What little remained of the lips was cracked, dry flesh, stretched into a horrendous smile. Standing in utter shock, I watched as he whispered out the words, "Santa's here to collect his little elf." That was enough to spur me into action. I closed the window and woke Jacob, ripping him out of his bed to carry him with me as I proceeded to scream bloody murder for the rest of the household to wake. By the time everyone was awake enough to process what I was telling them, the man was gone. My father and brother-in-law searched into the woods, while I stayed back home to guard the family. When they returned, they told me they'd lost the trail in the woods, but came across what they thought was where the man had been staying. At the far end of my father-in-law's property was a low cave. They had always assumed a bear lived in there. However, when the trail led them to it on this day, they found a ragged-looking elf costume with the name Jacob crudely sewn into it, and several half-chewed dead squirrels. They decided to turn back after that and called the police. So far, they've not found the guy, but they're still out there now searching with a tracker dog. Apparently, something similar happened to another family in the area last year. Only they hadn't been so lucky, and their son had been taken. Right now, everyone's still pretty shaken up, and Great Aunt Barbara is eating her weight in pudding, which is only making the experience more terrifying. We have, of course, offered the officers hot chocolate and Christmas lunch, though even now I still feel like we're being watched. So, yeah, that's how well my Christmas has gone. Yours?